Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks for joining our Vitals and Value at Risk webinar. I'm going to introduce Kevin Fiscus, who's one of our senior consultants. And Kevin is going to run through this webinar for us. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. And then there'll also be a poll that you can respond to as well in this webinar. So Kevin, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it. We'll just go ahead and jump right into it so that everybody can, we've got a relatively short amount of time and a lot of things to go through. But before we get on, I want to reinforce some stuff that Jason had mentioned. On the right side of your screen, there are a bunch of icons that should be stacked up vertically. One that looks like a greater than symbol, question mark, a little sideways bar chart, and so on and so forth. The question mark takes you to the questions tab. Feel free to add any questions that you have. We'll do our best to keep an eye on that and get to those. If you click on the little sideways bar chart, that is polls. So one of the things that we're doing is, as part of your participation in this particular webinar, you are eligible for a free, no-cost assessment of your IoMT or operational technology environment, a security assessment. So if you are interested in that, you can, we will be providing you with some email contact information that you can reach out to request that. But you can also go to the poll, and then just when you look there, you can actually respond to that poll, and we'll have your information so we can respond there as well. If you look under the next item down, it looks like a little speaking bubble with an exclamation point. You'll also get the contact information for myself and for Jason. Those are going to be the key areas that you can go ahead and look at. So welcome to our talk. My name is Kevin Fiscus. I'm a principal consultant with NTT Data. Just a little bit of background on me as to, why I'm sitting here talking to you about this stuff. I've been in the IT industry for about 35 years, which cannot be true because I'm convinced I'm not that old. About 24 of those I've been focused on cybersecurity. About half that time, I spent time working as a security consultant for a variety of resellers and system integrators. And then about 12 years of that, I also worked as an independent security consultant. And then I was a principal instructor and courseware author for the SANS Institute. So I taught classes globally for about 12 years. As you can see here, I also collect cybersecurity certifications. My goal is really just to get one of every letter of the alphabet after my name. It's getting close. I definitely still have some work to do. And just in case anybody's interested, I actually live in the middle of nowhere in southwestern Alabama. And I know that everybody is jealous. But with no further ado, let us go ahead and jump into our topic. So we're going to talk about a variety of different things. We're going to talk a little bit about the state of the industry as it pertains to Internet of Medical Things and operational technology. We'll talk a little bit about some regulatory issues. We're going to talk about threats and vulnerabilities to those devices, how we might go ahead and assess risk. And then we'll talk about some ways that we can deal with that overall situation, both in terms of controls and best practices, but also in terms of how we can adhere to regulations as we fall into that. So let's start off with some generalized statistics, right? When we talk about Internet of Things, Internet of Medical Things, operational technology, right? It is not a very pleasant picture in most cases. Again, pulling statistics from a variety of different places. I'd be happy to provide the sources for these if you are so interested in that. But studies have shown that 70% of critical infrastructure, including pharmaceutical companies, experience operational technology-related attacks in the past year. 99% of healthcare life sciences organizations that manage IoMT devices, those devices have what we call KEVs, or known exploitable vulnerabilities, right? So these are devices that are actively exploitable right now. And 89% of IoMT devices are insecurely connected to the internet. So effectively what we're saying, let's face it, these devices are computers. They're computers that don't look like computers, but they are computers. So if I came up to you and I said, you've got 89% of a certain type of computer is connected directly to the internet, and 99% of you have vulnerabilities in those devices, you would be horrified, right? That would be a terrible, terrible thing. But that's the state that we stand in, or that we sit in right now. These devices have been linked to 11% of ransomware campaigns, 28% of the specific devices. So 99% of organizations have vulnerable devices. but almost 1/3 of the devices in a given organization are going to be vulnerable, which is a huge problem. And then we get into, the overlap of those, right? The internet connection and the vulnerability, and we're still looking at about 8% of those devices. Now, you might be sitting there going, 8%, that's not a big deal. 8% is nothing. The problem is, this is what we would call an initial attack vector. This is how the bad guys gain initial access. Once they gain initial access, then we get into things like privilege escalation and lateral movement, living off the land, and all kinds of other types of nastiness. So this is a really serious situation. And the fact of the matter is that we've seen a bunch of these types of breaches, and this is only going back as far as 2017, where we can see various malware outbreaks and compromises and nationwide outages that are affecting huge numbers of people. I'm not going to go through and read every one of these details, but I can point to two different relatively recent breaches that resulted in the overall harm of over $1 billion per breach, right? That's a huge, big deal. Now, not everybody's going to suffer a breach that's quite that big and quite that impactful, but it doesn't need to be a gigantic dollar amount to be significantly impactful. I live in Alabama. There is a hospital here in Alabama in 2019 that was hit with a ransomware attack, right? That ransomware attack negatively affected. It actually took offline different connected medical devices, including fetal heart rate monitors. And while the fetal heart rate monitor would work in the patient's room, it was not connected to any. It was unable to connect up to anything else in the hospital. Well, a young lady, Tiriani kid, arrived at that hospital for a scheduled induction. She was going to be induced into having her child. And because of the inability to keep up on the fetal heart rate, her daughter was actually born with the umbilical cord wrapped around her neck, which resulted in severe brain damage, and that child died 9 months later. So this is a situation where the death of a newborn baby was directly attributable to a ransomware attack that targeted connected medical devices. So, the money, $1+ billion is a big deal. But that's not the only thing that we're talking about. We're talking about actual people's lives, which, again, it's hard to put a price tag on that kind of thing. So let's take a really quick overview. When we talk about regulatory alignment, this is not going to be a presentation on regulations. I wouldn't put anybody through that. But there are a lot of regulations that affect and or involve connected devices. So we have FDA guidance that's out there. We have 21 CFR Part 11 in the pharmaceutical place. We have GMP Annex 11 out of the EU, GAMP 5. All of these things have direct, explicit, or implicit references to connected medical devices or connected devices, operational technology, that kind of stuff. From a healthcare provider perspective, we have things like everybody's favorite, right? HIPAA, HITAC, and then some clarification like FDA cybersecurity guidance for medical devices, IEC 80001, again, a big deal there. I included NIST special publication. There's a little bit of typo there. It's 800-66, not 80-66. And again, that's really more of NIST's take on HIPAA security rule implementation. So that, again, all of these things relate to, at least in part, medical devices or connected devices. So now let's talk about the types of attacks that we're talking about. Now, we're going to go through a couple of different slides. And there are some things that I want to point out about these slides. These slides contain categories of vulnerabilities or categories of threats against these devices. Now, there's going to be four different slides, and each of these slides contains a list of different threats. So every one of these things that's listed in here, so we have things like side channel attacks. What is a side channel attack? It's basically attacking a device through or by looking at some element of that's not a direct interface. So things like power utilization or electromagnetic, discharge or things along those lines. We have memory and data access attacks, so direct memory access, or accessing the read-only memory, or non-volatile RAM extraction, or even memory and data bus interception. So these are all, again, physical attacks. We're not going to go through all of them, but the idea is there are a bunch of them, right? And that's important. There are a bunch of them. When we get into the actual system software, so now what we're basically talking about is the firmware or the operating system of that medical device. And like every operating system, there are vulnerabilities, there are threats against that, whether that be flaws in how the device boots up, or kernel drivers, so device drivers, so the ability to deploy things like rootkits. Vulnerabilities that just can't be patched, right? They can't be patched because there are no patches for them, or the firmware is not available, that type of thing. Again, we have things like privilege escalation. Living off the land is a big deal. So the bad guys get on there and they don't try to load their own tools. They abuse the tools and utilities that are already built into that operating system. Issues associated with updating firmware. So we can't update the firmware in some cases, leaving us vulnerable. But when we try to update it, we can still be attacked through that update process. Virtualization and memory attacks, and even issues with logging, right? So the device gets attacked. It discovers it's being attacked. It generates all of the logs necessary, and they just get interrupted or intercepted, that kind of stuff. We have networking issues as well. So attacks across the network, right? Connectivity, whether that be things like hard-coded credentials, or like web application vulnerabilities like cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, server-side request forgery, attacks against improper or insecure use of cryptographic protocols. All of that kind of stuff comes into play again. And you can see there's a long list here as well. So the idea is that whether it be the hardware, whether it's the network connectivity, or whether it's the software being an application or the underlying operating system, these are existing vulnerabilities that happen. This is why 99% of organizations have a vulnerable system. So why does this happen, right? Like, we don't see statistics like this associated with your typical Windows environment, right? Or even your typical Linux environment or Mac environment. So why does this happen? Well, in a lot of cases that happens, one is a cost savings. A lot of healthcare organizations do not want to spend a bunch of money to replace a perfectly functional device if the only problem is it might be vulnerable. Right. So we have those issues as well. A lot of the manufacturers of these medical devices are really good at making medical devices. They're just not really good at cybersecurity. So you end up with weak security controls. Taking these devices offline in order to update them or in order to patch them. Whoopsie, didn't mean to do that. Hold on. Or even in order to replace them can be very challenging, as it could disrupt pharmaceutical production operations, or it could disrupt hospital operations, that kind of stuff. And that's a huge big deal. So there are a lot of reasons why this happened. It's not that organizations just don't care. It's that it's really hard to solve some of these problems with devices that you can't just update. I can easily patch the Windows computer that I'm working on right now. I could patch that trivially easily. But if you wanted to look at, just imagine, for example, like, I don't know, trying to, I keep wanting to say trying to patch your VCR. That just shows how old I am. But think of all these devices that we have. Think of trying to patch your internet-connected refrigerator, right? Because people do have those. People actually have internet-connected toilet seats. Imagine trying to apply the patch to that. It's difficult, it's operationally intensive, and it's operationally disruptive, and that becomes a big deal. So we then get into this question about how in the world do I know if I'm at risk, right? And the generic answer outside of operational technology or IoMT is you perform some form of a risk assessment. You perform vulnerability scanning. You perform penetration testing. All of those things are really cool things to do, but they don't apply in most cases in the world of operational technology or Internet of Medical Things, because a lot of times these devices are somewhat fragile and they are used for critical functions. So if you just start scanning them, you end up with the potential of knocking them offline or disrupting operations. And that is not a good thing. So we have to take a different approach. Now, if you have enough redundancy built into your environment that you can proactively scan and do penetration testing and all that, that's awesome. But not all of us have that option to do so. So what we end up having to do is there's really kind of a couple of different ways that we can go about doing a risk assessment. And actually what I'm going to do is kind of show you a tool set that I built. This is not anything fancy. Please don't get all excited about some amazing thing. This is an Excel spreadsheet, to be honest. But I'll show you the methodology that I tend to use for this. So this one is actually based on something called MITRE Embed. And so the idea of this is MITRE Embed lists a whole bunch of properties of devices. Does it have a microprocessor? Does it have firmware that's not cryptographically checked? Now, the other thing that we have listed here are a whole bunch of controls that are in place. And the idea of this type of an assessment is you do an inventory of your devices in terms of the properties that they have. You do an inventory of the controls that you have. And then the idea is that those controls have been directly mapped to properties. So I can go ahead and use that mapping to say, here are the properties I have, here are the controls that I have. And if there is a property that does not have an applicable control, that would end up being a problem. Now, that's not the only way that we can go about this. Another way of going about, I'm just trying to open up the right screen here. Another way of going about doing this type of analysis is using something like MITRE's Attack Navigator. So I'll just give you a brief overview. I'm going to use the Industrial Control Systems Attack Navigator. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a search. And when I do the search, I'm going to do a search for mitigations. So the idea is, which controls do I have? So if I go ahead and I select the mitigations, I can go ahead and identify, hey, this is all the cool stuff that I have from a mitigation perspective. Then what I can go ahead and do is, and I'm trying to, they changed the interface on me a second, but what I can go ahead and do is I can, again, I'm just trying to find okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so scoring. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give these controls a score. So I have a control, which is access management. And then I can define, I can just put a 1 in there if I have it, or I can say on a score of 1 to 3. So we'll say I have a 3, right? And now what I've done is I've identified all of the attack techniques that this control mitigates. And then I can go ahead and create another layer. I can go here to the same thing. I'm going to go ahead and select my controls. Let me get rid of that. I can go ahead and select my controls. And the next one, I'll use another one that's kind of cool, that maybe has a bunch of stuff on it. So let's go find one that's more than just 1 or 2 things. And if I can't find something real quick, I'll just pick something real quick. But anyway, so I'll just pick this guy here. And I'll go ahead to here. Oopsie. So we'll select. And then when I go to scoring here, I'll just put a score of like 1 on here. So the idea is that now I have these 2 layers. And what I can do is I can add those 2 layers together. And again, I'm going too fast because I didn't save it properly. But the idea is that I can go and look at all of the controls that I have. And then I can add those scores together to find out which attack techniques my controls are properly mitigating and which ones they are not. So some really cool stuff you can do. And by the way, none of this touches any of your devices. And that's kind of the cool part about it. I'll actually show you the next slide. This is what the result of that kind of analysis that I was just showing you looks like, where anything that is white means there is no control in place to address that specific risk. And then as you get into the darker the red, the more controls exist in that particular area. So this is a security architecture review against different operational technology. So there's 2 different ways that we could go about doing those types of assessments that don't negatively impact production operations, right? We're not touching these devices, but we are developing an understanding of how our security architecture aligns with the risks and threats against those devices. Now, that said, it is still a very real thing to say that we cannot just go willy-nilly replace all of our devices with new ones that are properly securable, and we cannot just simply take things offline and all that kind of stuff. So what are the things that you can do right now? What are the things you can do that would be ideal in terms of reducing the risk? And the first thing that I'll talk about is segmentation, right? Segmentation is a big thing. This might, you might think of this as segmentation, micro-segmentation, zero trust, whatever. But the idea is that what we're going to do is we are going to put these medical devices on a very small subnet. I got to apologize here because I put the wrong numbers in here. It wouldn't be a /31 or a /32. It would be a /30 or a /31. So the idea is in both of those, you have only two computers. You have the device and some sort of a router or a routing firewall or something like that. And then you put access controls in between that subnet and other subnets. So we are limiting who can talk to each individual device. And this can actually be accomplished with specialized DHCP servers that can do things like profiling. So if you know that a particular MAC address is associated with a particular type of device, when that goes and requests an IP address, assuming that it's dynamic, it gets put into its own very small subnet with the appropriate access controls, which is cool. This is going to be benefited by using something like device profiling and dynamic subnet VLAN assignment, which is exactly what I was just talking about, right? Being able to, in an automated way, as much as possible, determine what the type of device it is based on its MAC address, based on the ports that it has open, based on its behavior in some cases, and then dynamically doing that assignment. Implementing access controls into and out of those subnets, it doesn't do a lot of good to create a whole bunch of subnets if you're not restricting access within and without those subnets. Another area is monitoring, right? There are a lot of connected devices that don't have very robust capabilities in terms of generating logs. So let's go see if we can do some packet capture of the packets going into and or out of those Internet of Things or Internet of Medical Things, operational technology subnets. So you have that visibility where you can do things like deep packet inspection, where you can generate net flow data, or just send that to your SIM or your NDR. And then kind of the overall thing, getting rid of, kind of very clunky legacy VPNs and looking at things like SD-WAN and zero trust network access or unidirectional gateways to provide access into those devices. A lot of times the vendors of those devices need some level of access. So how do we provide that to them in a way that doesn't expose you to excessive risk? And those are some of the areas where you can go and just do this, a lot of like kind of network architecture modifications in a real simple way. Multi-factor, if it is supported, right, multi-factor authentication, any kind of session recording, and obviously applying the principle of least privilege for any kind of third-party access. And this is where some of those more advanced access methods like zero trust network access are going to be beneficial. Looking at things that you're leveraging, things like AI, machine language, user and entity behavioral analytics, things along those lines to baseline normal device behavior, what normally happens with these devices. And if the device starts behaving in a weird way, like this device never talks to that server, why is it talking to it now? Definitely subscribe wherever possible to operational technology and Internet of Medical Things aware threat intelligence services. And then those things can actually be fed into SIM solutions and SOAR platforms to provide additional intelligence and correlation to the known threats that are out there and the behavior that's actually being seen on your network. I'm a huge fan. I mentioned that I worked for a long time for the SANS Institute. The class that I authored for them was on cyber deception. So don't get me started. We don't have enough time right now. But by placing effectively fake operational technology or fake Internet of Medical Things, I'll say fake, we can call it non-production. The idea is we're going to place devices on our network that look like real devices, but have no actual legitimate business function. They could be actual devices, they could be virtualized, whatever. And because they have no legitimate business function, normal is SO. okay, it seems like it dropped off for a second. But normal is defined as no use or no interaction. So when a bad guy gets on your network and they're trying to spread through your network to, do their ransomware attack, and they so much as send a packet to one of these non-production or deceptive devices, you get a high fidelity alert, and now you can go respond more effectively. And then things like proactive threat hunting are going to be a good thing. Dig into your networks on a periodic basis and look for bad stuff that's going on. So as we look at that, those are some of the areas where we can look at. And obviously you can see that what I tried to do was map some of those things directly to the regulations that called implicitly or explicitly for those. So again, that was really fast and a lot of stuff that we went through in a relatively short period of time. We now have an opportunity. I'm looking to see if there was any questions. I didn't see any questions that are posed. If you have questions, now is definitely the time to do that. Or you are absolutely welcome to reach out to myself or reach out to Jason and just say, hey, look, I'd like to talk about this a little bit more, right? Don't worry about it. It's not going to be like a sales pitch kind of a thing. If you want to get some more information, or if this type of stuff was interesting, two options. One is reach out to us. We happily, continue this conversation in a little bit more detail, should you want to do that. And as I mentioned before, by being part of this, you are also eligible for a $0 assessment of your IoT IoMT operational technology network. So using the same types of techniques that I briefly showed you, we can dig in and develop here's from an architectural perspective where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are. And we do that at no cost, right? And there's no obligation. There's nothing like that. But, we want to be able to provide that level of guidance. That said, again, we've got about 3 minutes left in the allocated time that we had for this. Again, just kind of looking at questions. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer those. Again, if you go on the poll section, which would be the third icon down, it looks sort of like a sideways bar chart. If you are interested in getting a free assessment done, you are more than welcome to do that. I believe that this session is recorded, right? So so if you do know of somebody else who might be interested in learning about the topics that we discussed here, you'll probably have a link to that recording. We'll make some of that stuff available, and you can feel free to forward that. So once this is recorded, you can do that as well. Cool. I think I've been talking rapidly for the better part of 30 minutes. Jason, anything you want to add?
No, that was great. You definitely got it all in there in perfect timing too. So if any questions or anybody wants to reach out to us, you have our email addresses. Kevin, that was awesome. Look forward to talking to everyone who wants to dig in a little bit deeper.
Absolutely. For those of you who are joining, thank you guys so much for taking time out of your day to take a look at this topic. It's a topic that I'm very passionate about. I believe that we can do a better job than we are as an industry in terms of protecting these types of devices and reducing risk against our organization. And so I appreciate you taking the time to learn about this. I hope you can, found it a valuable use of your time. But I want to just say thank you guys so much for participating.